I find myself in a somewhat complex situation. More accurately, it's not so much a problem as it is an issue that leaves me uncertain about how to resolve it. My mother and sister have been asking me for money for a long time, but recently it feels like their demands have crossed a line. While I think about cutting ties with them, I hesitate because such actions might make their lives more difficult. However, I have decided not to meet their demands any longer. I am currently 38 years old and have 2 children. I have been living in Ohio for 6 years since I got married. My father, Richard, originally from Houston, decided to divorce my mother due to her infidelity and moved out of our lives. That incident caused him great pain. Whether he truly blamed my mother or was just dealing with the situation, I do not know. When they got divorced, I was 10 years old, and my sister was only 5. During their divorce, there were rumors that he doubted whether my sister was his child, which reportedly was a major reason for the divorce. He left the house to my mother and moved out, but he continued to pay the mortgage. While he spared no expense on my education, he maintained a firm stance of not paying any child support for my sister. I cannot understand why my mother did not object to this situation. He hardly ever contacted us. Still, he occasionally appeared at school to pay my tuition and brought me gifts. By high school, I started reaching out to him on my own. Since then, he became involved in my life and even attended my wedding. For me, the bond with him was stronger than with my mother. Since I started living here, he visited Ohio twice, but that did not continue. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away last year. My mother was not pleased with my close relationship with him. As relations between them worsened, he trusted me and named me as the heir to his estate. He remarried a few years after divorcing my mother, but that marriage produced no children, and I was his only daughter. Therefore, my mother and sister began to harbor strong animosity towards me. The fact that my father truly loved me and left me $400,000 in a trust fund deepened the rift between us. This issue is not just about the inheritance, it involves a more complex clash of emotions. Thanks to Dad paying for my education, I attended better schools, had a wonderful college experience, and overall grew up in a more privileged environment. This was due to the child support he provided. When my parents got divorced, I was still 10 years old, and he began paying child support from that time. Later, additional support for education was provided, primarily going directly to school and university payments from when I was about 12 years old. My mother could not fully manage these funds, but occasionally used part of the child support for my sister and other household expenses. I have always been well aware of my position, and my mother was careful not to upset me. This does not mean that my mother and sister took a terrible attitude towards me directly, but I felt they were not fond of me. Their attitude towards me was cold and stern while I was at home. I was also academically excellent and the type to stand up for myself from a young age. This is probably why my mother did not treat me harshly. Currently, the problem is the $400,000 inheritance left by Dad. As soon as my mother and sister found out about it, they started frequently asking to borrow money. Honestly, this is not the first time I have provided them with financial assistance. As my income increased with my job, so did their demands, and each time I helped them out. I do not feel a special obligation to them, but they are family, and I have supported them because their income is insufficient. My mother works as a cashier in a small store. I work as a staff in a large supermarket, and my sister works in customer service at a boutique. Their combined income is only about half of mine, and that is one reason I feel I must help them. We are not particularly close as a family, but they have never been mean or malicious towards me. A few months ago, my mother called me and talked about wanting to renovate the house. The walls, ceiling, and floors were significantly damaged from years of use. Since Dad left, the house had not been painted once, and no repairs were made to the old wiring. Parts of the ceiling and walls had already started to crumble. Due to a lack of funds, they could not afford to maintain the home. On rainy and stormy days, it's worrisome even being inside the house, she said. The whole house feels like it's about to collapse, and I tried asking the bank for a loan, but the interest rates were too high, she continued. It was clear what she was seeking. My mother wanted financial support from me for the house repairs. Honestly, that conversation was very awkward. It was clear what she wanted, but we never had a frank discussion about the topic. After that conversation, I started avoiding calls from my mother. Usually she calls me about once a month, but this time she was reaching out 3 or 4 times a month. When I finally answered the phone, she said, "The recent bad weather has further damaged the house, and it's dangerous to live in it as it is now." This time, she directly asked for money and promised to repay it in installments. When I asked, "How much money are you thinking of?" she answered, $100,000. I was shocked by the amount and firmly told her, "I can't lend that much money." Then, she casually brought up the topic of inheritance. I was upset but avoided getting into a deep discussion about the trust fund money. Eventually, I told her the maximum amount I could lend was $50,000, and she agreed. However, I later realized that this decision was rash. I could have ignored her without saying anything. But since I had already promised to lend the money, ignoring her was not an option. Still, I felt uneasy about lending such a large amount, so I consulted my husband. He advised, instead of giving the full amount at once, send it in small increments and check the progress of the construction each time. I told my mother, "I will send the $50,000 in installments." I reactivated an old account I had in Houston, deposited the $50,000 there, and gave her access to that account. She asked, "Why don't you transfer the money directly to my account?" I made some rather meaningless excuses. Actually, this was a method my husband had suggested. It has been 2 months since I started lending money to my mother. Recently, I heard from a friend, not from my family, that my sister is getting married. My friend's husband is a wedding planner, and he told me that my sister was arranging a lavish wedding through his agency. My sister did not know that I was friends with them. The cost of my sister's wedding was a grand $50,000. I was shocked to hear about my sister's wedding from someone else. I had no idea about it. At first, I thought it would be a small ceremony with close people, but then my friend said, there will be about 100 guests. I was very sad that I was not invited. While that was the most painful thing, I was also worried about the money issue. Where did she get the funds for such a lavish wedding? It was held at the most luxurious venue in town, with unlimited food and drinks, and the decorations and flowers were of the highest quality. Worried, I checked the bank account where I had sent the money for the supposed renovation. There was no money left. I called my mother to ask if the renovation had started. She said, "I've asked the contractor, but the work hasn't started yet." At that moment, I felt that the renovation story was a lie. And then, I could no longer tolerate her lies. If they had actually used my money for her wedding, it was clear that no work had been done yet. But the thought of taking money from me for home renovations, while spending a large sum on my sister's wedding, made me feel extremely uncomfortable. I wanted to go to Houston immediately to see what was really happening, but I thought it would be pointless. So I called an aunt who lives a few blocks from my mother's house and asked if she knew about my sister's wedding. She said she knew, but she hadn't been invited either. My aunt is my father's sister, and I can understand why my mother doesn't like my father's family. My aunt said, "Your sister's wedding has been the talk among people around here." Indeed, a few years ago, my mother's house was falling apart, and they were desperately working just to put some food on the table, but now they have a fine new home and a lavish wedding. At that moment, I felt dizzy and didn't know how to react. My mother said, "The house hasn't been repaired yet, but my aunt said it was shining with new paint." Then, I remembered something. About 6 months ago, my mother had asked me for $20,000 for knee replacement surgery. I called her to ask about the hospital where the surgery was performed. She said, "I don't remember which hospital it was, I asked for details like the name of the doctor or nurse, but she couldn't answer anything. Pretending to be surprised, she acted as if the internet connection was bad and hung up the phone. When I called again, her phone was off for a while, and she didn't respond after that. So, I sent her a text message. However, my message was left unread for days. That's when I finally confirmed that she was lying. The money I gave for the supposed surgery was used for the house repairs, and the money she asked for the repairs was actually used for my sister's luxurious wedding. My aunt further revealed, "Your sister's engagement party was held in the backyard of the family home, where wine was used abundantly to decorate throughout the house." I felt as if I were trapped in deep darkness. I had no idea they were living such a luxurious life while pretending to be poor in front of me and siphoning my money without permission. I then understood they were being kind because they were after my money, but I never expected them to tell such terrible lies to get money from me. If they had been honest with me, it wouldn't have hurt so much. After that, I decided to completely ignore them. I also stopped transferring money to the Houston account. Even when my mother called, I did not answer, nor did I reply to her text messages. Then, suddenly my sister, who hadn't contacted me for years, called, but I did not respond. My relationship with them is over. I no longer intend to engage with their lies and manipulations. What does it matter that I earn more than they do, or that my father left them nothing from his estate? That doesn't give them the right to do what they did. They were just siphoning money from me and deceiving me. When I completely ignored their contacts, my mother called my husband. He inadvertently ruined everything. I had asked him beforehand not to respond to their calls or emails, yet he answered my mother's call. "She is ignoring me," my mother said, crying. Then, she continued, "I needed the money for the renovation." But she broke her promise in the middle of it. My husband accidentally told the truth. I wanted to hit him at that moment. He said I had already known the truth, that my mother had been financially exploiting me for a long time, and that the money was supposed to be used for my sister's wedding, which is why I cut off the relationship. After that call, my mother sent numerous apology emails. "It's all a misunderstanding, and I'm just repaying someone else's money with yours for the house repairs," she said. Of course, this was a complete lie, and as the calls and messages continued non-stop, I sent a message saying, "I will answer the phone if you promise to tell the truth." My mother replied, "Understood," so I called her. Then, she began to tell the truth. My sister wanted a lavish wedding but didn't have enough money for it, so she decided to ask me for money. It was my sister's idea to use the house repairs as a reason to get money from me. They knew I hadn't been to Houston for years and hadn't been in touch with anyone, so they thought I wouldn't notice that the house had already been repaired. "Why didn't you just ask directly for money for the wedding from the beginning?" I asked. She said it was because my sister didn't want that. She further said, "The house was quite damaged, and your sister's fiancé's parents were planning to visit, so we needed to repair it quickly." They couldn't think of a good excuse to get the money from me quickly, so in a panic, my mother called and said, "The doctor recommended emergency knee replacement surgery," and I immediately transferred the money. I remained calm on the phone, but deep inside, I felt profound sadness that my own mother was deceiving me for her benefit. I understand that my mother is financially struggling, but using that as a reason to emotionally manipulate and extort money from me is not acceptable. After knowing all the facts, I couldn't stop crying after hanging up the phone. I don't remember the last time I cried so much. Perhaps it was when my father died. That day, I especially missed my father terribly. He was the only one who loved and cared for me unconditionally. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from my mother saying, "I need the rest of the money to continue preparing for the wedding." At that moment, I was very angry and felt like blaming my mother. I couldn't understand how she could say such a thing. There was no sense of regret in her words, and I felt all she wanted was money. Moreover, they didn't even invite me to the wedding. Now that the truth is clear, I am filled with anger. I have blocked both of them from contacting me. I also sternly told my husband not to answer any calls. If he doesn't comply, I'll have him sleep on the porch outside next time. I still keep in touch with my aunt regularly, and I know the wedding is next month. We haven't talked about the money, but day by day I know my mother and sister are preparing for their ideal wedding. As the wedding day approaches, I receive multiple calls and voicemails from my mother and sister asking for money. However, I stood my ground and was not swayed. The last voicemail from my mother said, "I am disappointed in you. We're cutting ties. Never contact or visit me again." Hearing those words, I felt very disheartened and cried in front of my husband. I understand that people around me might blame me for being cruel and horrible for ruining my sister's wedding. My mother also blamed me, calling me selfish and unreasonable, but she never once reflected on the lies she had told. In reality, she had been deceiving me all along. I supported them out of a sense of duty as a family member, but I realized that to them, I was just a source of money. A friend, whose husband was the wedding planner for my sister's wedding, contacted me saying the wedding might be canceled because the expenses haven't been paid. When I asked how much had been paid, she replied, $20,000, I said. $20,000 should be enough for a wonderful wedding, but my friend explained, they've arranged for luxurious decorations, food, and a high-end venue, and that alone has already cost $20,000. Then, she asked if I would attend. I have other commitments, I answered. Knowing that I wasn't very close to my mother or sister, my friend seemed a bit upset by my honesty. I briefly considered sending the remaining expenses to my friend to ensure the wedding proceeded as planned, feeling responsible for ruining my sister's wedding. However, I remembered the last voicemail from my mother. She had told me she was cutting ties with me. If that's the case, then no matter how much I try to help, it would be in vain. My actions might seem harsh, but they were merely a response to their deliberate behavior. Afterward, I turned off my cell phone and went out with my children to reset my mood. The next day, my friend contacted me again. She was angry with my sister. On the day of the wedding, my friend's husband, the planner, had his reputation damaged because he was asked by my mother and sister to make do with the bare minimum, and they promised him an additional $10,000 to somehow manage the basic food and decorations. However, the guests and the groom's family criticized the wedding preparations severely, and my sister blamed everything on the planner. My friend's husband was angry and wanted to tell everyone the truth, but my mother pleaded desperately not to ruin my sister's life. Being a compassionate person, he agreed to stay silent. In the end, they managed to hold the wedding by taking responsibility for it themselves. However, they still haven't paid the promised $10,000. I was filled with deep shame about my family's actions. I stood silently, saying nothing. My friend said, "I'm at a loss for words, but she wasn't blaming me, she just wanted to vent her frustrations to me as a friend." I was very disappointed that my family had been exposed to such an embarrassing situation. My husband told me that they were facing the natural consequences of their actions, so I shouldn't worry too much. They tried to impress others with lies, and now they were paying the price. I felt relieved to have distanced myself from their schemes. The disownment by my mother ultimately steered my life in a better direction. I no longer need to worry about their lies and schemes. The situation escalated more than I expected, and the chaotic wedding became a major local scandal, causing strong resentment from the groom's relatives. According to my friend, the groom's parents began investigating the wedding expenses and discovered I had lent money. Initially, my mother and sister tried to blame everything on the wedding planner, but he had kept all the emails and contracts, which were handed over to the groom's family. These included evidence that my mother had promised financial support from me. The groom's parents were furious upon learning this, leading to a terrible start to my sister's married life. The trust the groom's parents had in my sister and mother was completely broken, and it caused a significant rift in their relationship. The situation worsened, and rumors spread to my mother's workplace. Working as a cashier, my mother suddenly faced a loss of trust from her colleagues due to her sudden lavish lifestyle, and the stories of her extorting money from her daughter. Eventually, she felt so uncomfortable at work that she had no choice but to resign. My sister faced a similar situation at the boutique where she worked. Rumors that she had scammed money from me for her wedding spread quickly in the small town. Some customers even began to overtly avoid her. According to recent information from my aunt, my mother and sister are now in a very difficult financial situation. They still haven't paid the remaining wedding expenses, and they're behind on rent for their new home. My mother is struggling to find a new job due to her age and tarnished reputation. Sometimes I wonder if this is too harsh a consequence, but my husband calmly says they brought this upon themselves. Indeed, considering the years of lies, manipulation, and the final act of disownment, perhaps this outcome was inevitable. I occasionally hear about my mother and sister's situation from my aunt, but I keep my distance. This series of events has reaffirmed that without trust, even blood ties do not make a true family.